Hey guys, before we start, a quick shout out to Alpha Dog Nutrition for sponsoring this podcast. Alpha Dog products are now available at dusupply.com, and you can use code ALPHADOG15 at checkout for 15% off and a credit for free shipping to try it yourself. Now let's get you to your podcast.
Where's Fielder? He's gone to the dogs.
Yep, this is it. I've been sitting here for an hour waiting on you.
Yeah, well, you got all the world's problems solved and everything there. I'm sure sitting around the country store. Tracey Jones, T.L. Jones, to those of you on the Book of Faces, is our special guest today. Tracey, it's good to hear your voice, brother. How are you?
I'm doing well. I've been trying to get some hay on the ground and try to get it up.
Well, that's what you said this morning, and you're a man of many talents, and besides being a published author now and a Baptist minister, father of a beautiful family and grandkids and all that, and then you're a farmer too. And we can't forget a bear hunter, a Plott breeder. You got a lot of hats.
Yep. Got a lot going on around here, and I always enjoy seeing that last bale of hay get stacked on the place. I know I can coast through the rest of the fall then.
Yeah, that's a great feeling, I'm sure. The harvest, I lived in Michigan for many years, and lots of farmers there in West Michigan, and it was always a real treat for me, really, to see the crops coming out of the fields and into the grain bins and all that, and you're there in Greenville, Tennessee, which is, I guess you're considered East Tennessee, aren't you?
Yeah, southeast.
Southeast. Yeah, it was over in what they normally call Middle Tennessee, where I did probably, maybe not the most, but I did. I put up hay in my grandmother's barn and in the neighbor's barn, and then I spent my summers in Virginia a lot at my uncle's, and so I've spent a little time in a hay field. Is it still hot out there?
Yeah, it's plenty hot. Hay fields here, in East Tennessee are usually smaller fields. If you get 20 or 30 acres, that's a pretty good size field, and so you're always hopping from one little field to the next to get enough hay. And I feed about around 300 to 350 round bales in a winter. So,
oh boy. Well, you keep mama cows and sell off the calves, and
mama cows and raise the calves. Yeah.
All right. Well, that's you've got a rich family history, and we want to peel back a few of the layers of that today in our visit, Tracey. I'll reiterate, I'm very, very glad to have you on the program. You and I have known each other for a long time, and your grandfather's breeding of Plott Hounds greatly influenced my own back several years ago. And I've told people up and down the countryside that my all-time favorite hound was a hound that came from your grandfather. So, just real privileged to be able to talk to you and about you. I know that you've made the podcast circuit really in made wider circles than this Gone to the Dogs podcast will reach with your visits with Clay and others. And I'm just real privileged to have you on today. The first thing I think I want to talk to you about And I guess we should establish with our listeners a little bit about who you are. The first time I remember talking to you, Tracey, I was in Michigan at the time. I believe still working with UKC. And you called and said and introduced yourself as being the grandson of Barry Tarleton. And do you recall that conversation, or am I even close?
I don't recall the conversation. That's very possible.
Yeah. I think you were in Montana at the time, pastoring there. And I want to run through all that with you. But, and anyway, I think that's when we first became acquainted. And I've been privileged to come to your house on two or three occasions. And one, the last time I was there was a very special time that I was able to spend around the table there with your grandfather before he passed, and will always be a treasured memory for me. But tell me about, or tell my listeners who Tracey Jones is. Where'd you come from? Where'd you go? Where'd you come from, Cotton Eye Joe?
Well, I was born here in Greene County, Tennessee. I was fortunate to be born into a family of dog hunters.
Yes.
My grandpa was Papa, is the term they use here in East Tennessee.
Sure.
My Papa was pretty well known among Plott people. He had got started into Plotts sometime in the 50s. We don't know the exact date, but we know he raised a litter of Plott puppies in 65 for sure. And we know that a friend of ours went to a treed bear with a pack of Plotts. I think it was in 65. And so he had a full-fledged pack of Plotts then. So sometime in the mid to late 50s is when he got into Plotts. And it happened, he was coon hunting all the time. And every now and then would tree a bear, and they were pretty thin. And somehow he met Von Plott. And Von told him that if he wanted to be a bear hunter, he needed to have Plotts, because at the time he was hunting some great dogs. And usually back then, there was a lot of mix between red bones and black and tans. Walkers really hadn't got a foothold in this country back then. And Papa always joked, one of his favorite jokes is he would tell people, he said, before the walkers got here, there wasn't very many coons, but now that mostly people hunt walkers, there's a lot of coons. And he loved to tell that.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
But so anyways, Von Plott told him he needed to get into Plotts, and he struggled to find one. And he ended up getting a female out of Kentucky off of somebody. And there was a lot of sort of this and that's, like from the mid 50s, late 50s through the 60s there, until he finally settled on what he was going to raise and breed. And that ended up being around the early 70s. He had a young female named Jap that had come from Gene White out of White Hollow Jr. And they had turned loose on a bear, and the Jap dog got hurt. And it was one of those injuries where she would never be the same again. And so he traded her back to Jean for her littermate sister. Jean used her as a brood female for years. You'll see her in people's papers, White Hollow Jap. And then Papa ended up with a Roberta female, which was where your Bronco dog came from. So anyways, I was born into a bear hunting family. I can't take any credit for the Houston Valley Plott starting, and never really take any credit for what they've done or what they've been. Just been blessed to be around a family that really loved dogs.
Well, as was I, Tracey, for sure. And, that heritage factor, I don't know how much it plays in the breeding of dogs anymore. I don't know how many of the younger hunters or new hunters that are coming along have had the activity of the sport or the lifestyle passed down to them from a family member. I would say there's still probably quite a few, but maybe not as many as back, in our day. Your grandfather started, from what you've said, about the same time in the Plott breed as my dad did in 1954. And then he had some grade Plotts before that. But his influence was who was probably the oldest Plott breeder at that time, because he was older than Von Plott, was Isaiah Kidd. Mm-hmm. And so Mr. Kidd, was his source of his early dogs and of the early history, of the dogs. And I think Mr. Kidd himself had gone down to the mountains and got some dogs. His background there in Raleigh County, West Virginia, where I was born, was that they had cur dogs when he was a young man coming up. And I remember Mr. Kidd was in his 80s when I went away to college in the 60s. So I got a photo of he and his wife. Her name was Frenchie. And they were sitting on the couch there in our living room there in Beckley, West Virginia. So probably when I was in high school, I would imagine. But the first I heard of your grandfather was, and I've told the story before, and I won't get into it in any great detail, was through Oliver Smith. And Oliver Smith III, attorney there in Knoxville, Tennessee, and a prominent bear hunter that had the means to go all over the country and hunt bears, which most of us didn't. And he bought a dog from Doyle DeMoss out in Washington and made that dog famous, Cascade Big Timber. Well, your grandfather had bred his female, Roberta, to Timber, right? And Roberta was out of the White Hollow Junior dog that you mentioned earlier.
Yep, I actually made that trip down to Oliver Smith's for that breeding.
Oh, okay.
I was, of course, just a kid, but I remember it because when I walked in Oliver's house, the taxidermy work that he had in the house, you just don't forget.
No.
And, as a little kid, grew up here in Greene County, you didn't see African animals. And if I remember right, I think he even had a polar bear mounted.
He did. He had a full-size polar bear mounted there.
That was just right as you come in the door, I think.
Yeah. And one of the things that he showed me that was quite interesting, those of us in the mountains know what a Arkansas toothpick is.
Yeah.
The bone that's in the penis bone in a raccoon, well, a bear has one too. But Oliver showed me one from a walrus, and it was incredibly big.
Unreal.
Maybe you saw that too. I don't know. But
it's possible. I don't remember.
Yeah.
I know Oliver came up. He came up here 2 or 3 times bear hunting, I think. And Gene White would come up from time to time and hunt. And one year, I know Big John Tate. He came up out of Knoxville. He was the heavyweight world champ for a while.
Oh, yeah.
He came up and bear hunted once, and I don't remember if he came with Gene or who brought him up for Knoxville, but he was up here. And so I was fortunate to get to meet and see all kinds of unique things, as a kid, because of people wanting to come up and see Papa's dogs and be around him and stuff. And
yeah,
Oliver, he had the timber dog, and a lot of people today won't remember this, but back then you didn't talk to people on the phone much because your salary, you might make $3 an hour, and a long distance phone call would be 15 cents a minute.
Hmm.
And they just didn't call people. You didn't call people in the next county over.
Right.
So you wrote letters about dogs, and the only way you knew a stud dog would maybe to see it be advertised in a magazine, or you would get the MPHA yearbook and see that. And that's how I met your dad the first time. We got the MPHA yearbook, and I was sitting on the couch. I still remember like it was yesterday. And Papa was sitting in his recliner, and I was just flipping through that yearbook and looked down, and I saw a dog there advertised for stud, and it said his dam was Tarleton's Roberta. And I walked over and I told my grandpa, I said, hey, this dog's here. She's we called her Polly. That was her kennel name.
Okay.
The papers were Roberta, but nobody ever called her Roberta her whole life. It was always Polly.
I learned something right there.
Yep. And she was never referred to by that. And I said, this is old Polly here. That's hers. That dog's out of her. So we looked that all over. And of course, I was all stoked up that Bronco was in a magazine, because I was truly naive enough back then to, if it was advertised, man, I believed it.
Yeah.
I mean, whatever that book said about a dog, I just believed it, because I couldn't imagine somebody lie in it.
Well, I know.
So we got on the phone right away and called Mr. Hammond and made arrangements to get a pup out of Bronco. And he met us down on 11E here in Greenwood, a gas station. And we talked to him quite a while that day. And when we picked that pup up, so that's how I met your dad. And of course, I think I met you primarily through when you started. We were in Montana, and you started plottdogs.com before social media really got going.
Okay. Yes. Mm-hmm.
And I believe I called to ask you about a dog that I was interested. Papa was interested in breeding a female too. I think is why I would have called you that time.
Okay. Yeah, and that would probably translate or progress into the trip he made to Wisconsin to breed. Maybe,
yeah,
right?
I think so.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, we could and certainly should devote this whole podcast to the memory of your grandfather. He was a consummate bear hunter. He was a Southern gentleman, par excellence in my mind. Very humble man, soft-spoken. You would think with his background, being in law enforcement and all as he was, and I've enjoyed and really been amazed at some of the stories of his battles with the moonshiners and things like that there in East Tennessee. You would think him to be a big, boisterous, bully kind of a guy,
No.
But he wasn't, was he?
No, never met a stranger.
Right.
And you had to really go out of your way for him not to want to be your friend.
I see. Yeah.
And I mean, he loved people. A lot of people today say, well, the more I learn about people, the more I like my dogs and all that kind of stuff. Man, Papa, not him. He loved people. He liked being around them. He liked talking. And you just had to do something just completely out of hand for him not to like you.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, one of my treasured photos, and I used to take lots of photos, and in the days before digital photography, I burned through a lot of UKC's and AKC's and PKC's budget with photographs for the magazines and things. And you mentioned that plottdogs.com website, which, I wanted to do something to have a place where Plott people could gather online. And that's why I started that. And we had a message forum. And we also, if I heard of any Plott dog anywhere making any noise, in competition or hunting or whatever, I tried to post them on the front page, like a news article and all of that. And I really enjoyed doing that. But one of the things that we did, as you recall, was we held a Plott Dogs reunion. And the first one that we held in Greenville. And your grandfather was there. And I have a photo of him, and you mentioned Gene White, and my dad sitting together there. And then there's some other notables in there. I think Steve Hurd is in one of those photos. And, oh boy, I can't remember exactly, who the other people were that Mike Cawley from Louisiana. Just different ones, that I had met over the years and respected. But that picture of your granddad and my dad and Gene White's very special to me. We could do a podcast on Gene White, another very soft-spoken, polite fella that had an unusual career. He was a dealer in a casino, is what he did for a living, and was out in Nevada and that area, and always had his Plott dogs. And so many.
I went to Gene's house several times, growing up, and I've got a picture of me and Gene together when I'm probably about 8 years old, up on the mountain here where I live, where we bear hunt, us standing in the road together.
Yeah.
And he was a very soft-spoken person, very unpretentious.
Sure.
And Papa absolutely loved the White Hollow Junior dog. And he would talk about, he went to Canada with Gene on a number of occasions. And Papa said they were driving down the road one day and trying to rig a bear off the road, and Junior was laying asleep in the back of the truck. And Papa said, Gene, he said, how are we going to rig a bear with Junior laying back there asleep? And Gene said to him, Barry, I'd rather have Junior back there asleep as most dogs back there awake.
Yeah, that's pretty good. Pretty good. Old June could get it done, couldn't he? Yeah, White Hollow Jr., a Hall of Fame dog in the National Plott Hound Association, and was sired by a famous dog called Weems Plott John, and out of a dog from up north there called Black River Fly. And those Black River dogs, Clyde Bounds had those dogs. And Clyde wrote a book about a dog he had called Black River Bolly. I don't have a copy of that. Do you have that book, Tracey?
I don't have it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't think there were very many copies of it in print, but it's a good one if Plott historians can find it somewhere. But, what I was particularly interested in back in those days, and this name may bring some memories for you, I was interested in the dogs of Kermit Allison's because, they were bred to Junior, White Hollow Junior, and that's where Polly came from. And ultimately, the little Junior dog that we bred to. And do you recall anything about Kermit?
No, the only thing I know about the dogs on Roberta's pedigree is just what's on the pedigree. I never personally hunted with any of them or anything like that. Papa hunted with Junior on multiple occasions here and in Canada both, but I never did. Not old enough to where I could recall anything.
Well, early on, and I've told this story to a lot of people, this history, so I won't go into all of it, but in the early 70s, my dad and Everett Weems got together and did some breeding. And, they found that the dogs that they had went back to pretty much the same foundation. And they started in Plotts about the same time. They were the same age, my dad and Everett. But
Yeah.
I developed a real affection or appreciation for what I call dogs that looked like Weems bred dogs. They had a flat crown to their head. They had a high set ear, but they had a good ear. They were a little heavier haired than some. Some of them had a kind of a foxhound tail, kind of a flag tail a little bit, or the old Plott standards called it saber tail, like a sword. But I just loved that look in the dogs, and White Hollow Jr. had that look, and the Bronco dog that I had did as well, So I guess we develop our own preferences in the dogs, and that stuck with me down through the years. It's hard for me to look at a Plott dog that's all real slick and shiny and not much hair on its tail. And no, I just say that's not the kind I grew up on, but I'm not criticizing those dogs because a lot of guys wouldn't want these old rough-haired dogs that I hunted down through the years, but it's just a matter of preference.
Everybody has their preferences, and there's nothing wrong with that. Whatever whatever you enjoy is fine with me.
Sure, absolutely. Well, we both definitely do have a strong heritage in the Plott breed, and it's good to see that you and your son Ben is carrying that on. Ben's quite the bear hunter. He's anybody that's hunted with Ben, I think, has had a rough day if they try to keep up with him. From what I've heard,
Ben's really he's really the one that takes care of all the dogs and the hound hunting anymore. And he's done a real good job with them, and he's got a good set of dogs. That's for sure. And everybody likes to argue over what was better, the old dogs or the new dogs. Yeah. And I don't understand the argument because the same character traits it took to catch a bear in 1965 are the same character traits it takes to catch a bear in 2024. And the dog that can do it well is the dog that can do it well, no matter how many years there is between them.
Well, that's true. We will concede that the bear hunter of today has a lot more tools available to him than like your grandfather did, or probably when you started out, or your dad. And let's don't forget Terry. He was quite the bear hunter as well, wasn't he? Yeah.
I mean, I can talk about Dad all day, and I did do a podcast with Chris Powell about Dad specifically, but we were saturated in a bear hunting culture. It was my grandpa, my dad, multiple cousins. The Larry boys were cousins that Papa loved like they were his own sons. Friends. I mean, like for instance, on a Sunday for us, a Sunday was Papa never missed church with rare exceptions. So he'd go to church, and whether you went with him or not, when he got home from church, you had Sunday dinner. When that was over, he went out on the porch and sat down, and then people would start showing up.
Yeah.
And they would sit there for a couple hours and talk bear hunting every Sunday afternoon. And it was, whether season was open or not, that's the way it was nearly year round with rare exception. And, they farmed because that's how they made part of their living. But farming was not what they were all about. It was, but the family was a bear hunting family. That's what they talked about. That's what they wanted to do. And Papa kept a lot of dogs. He was, and Dad would only keep no more than 2. Dad never kept more than 2, but so that's just the difference between them. Papa wanted a truckload, and Dad, all Dad wanted was a trail dog.
I got you. He wanted a cold trailer.
You hunt different. You hunted different then than you do now, even here where we live. There was a lot fewer bear. And some people don't understand this too, but bear hunting in the late 60s to early 70s was basically something they were relearning, because the bear population had been decimated, almost not to the point of extinction, but to the point of rarity. And people just didn't bear hunt with hounds. And so when North Carolina and Tennessee reestablished bear hunting seasons, the population was very low. And when the men really were almost training themselves to re-bear hunt again, if that makes sense. And when they would find a track, when they would find a track, you very seldom winded one off the road. That was very seldom. You parked the truck and took off with a dog. Now, when people leave the truck, they generally take all their dogs with them. But they would take one dog, and that person would go out a trail or whatever. But generally, he was on his way to find a place where maybe he knew was a white oak ridge, or where there was some wild grapes or something, where maybe a bear would be feeding. And they'd go into those, what they call feeding grounds. And if a dog would strike and knew they had something, they left that dog on a leash sometimes until they trailed that bear completely up and jumped him.
I see. Well, I don't recall leaving a strike dog on the leash perhaps that long, but certainly our methods of bear hunting were the same. In the Appalachian Mountains, actually the Allegheny Mountains, which are all part of the Appalachians, but that run between Virginia and West Virginia, the bear situation was the same as yours. They had basically been hunted out around the turn, pretty much hunted out by the turn of the century up there. My dad used to tell me we'd be out in the mountains. He said, Steve, at one time, these mountains here were full of people. There were homesteads everywhere, and, the game before Teddy Roosevelt came along and put in place some regulations and what we call the North American model of conservation. They just, if there was a bear, he was a dead bear if they could make it happen. And we were the same way, and we hunted that way too. We had dogs. We started on the mountain. We'd walk those up toward the main ridge, but there'd be ridges that came off that main mountain. Maybe the mountain was Peters Mountain there that separates Virginia and West Virginia. That's where Isaiah Kidd hunted. And we'd go up a ridge and drop down in the hollow on the other side, and up another one and down the other. And, hopeful that start dog, a dog that we could depend on not to run trash, was the main thing, and to have enough nose. And this, I'm preaching to the choir here with you, but for our listeners' benefit. And that's how we bear hunted, and when we got that strike, and if it seemed like it was, we'd listen, try to keep up with that dog and feed more dogs in, as the track picked up. And then we'd be out of it from then on. And we get a call on those big old 5-pound radios we carry that, they'd treed the bear on such and such creek, and so killed it, and they were dragging it out, and where are you going to come off, and we'll pick you up. That's about come off the mountain, But
people here would cut the bottom end of a blue jean leg out and sew one end shut, and then sew a strap to the other part. That's what they carried the radio in. Was those
big old things that look like something from World War II or something with a big telescopic antenna on it. And you were always breaking that antenna off in the brush.
Now, I will say this. My grandpa loved technology. A lot of folks, they sort of romanticize what life was like before all the technology. But my papa, he would say, I lived those good old days. I don't want no more of them good old days. And if something new came, I mean, when he first started hunting, and of course when I first started going along with him hunting too, all you had was a leather collar and a nameplate.
Mm-hmm.
And they stamped out their own nameplates. Dad bought a set of stencils out of probably boatmen's.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
Boatman was the only place you could really get hound hunting supply for a while. Then Nightlight come along after Boatman's.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, and I still have those stencils.
Yeah, if you lived in the Midwest, upper Midwest and all, there were a few dog supply houses up in that area, But, yeah, you pretty much nailed it. It was Bill Boatman Company there in Bainbridge, Ohio. And there was a black and tan breeder, Uncle Jimmy Holm from Paris, Tennessee. He used to sell supplies and coats and different things. And I've still got one of his canvas hunting coat, coon coat, they called it. It had a big pouch in the back or game bag in the back. But yeah, you did that. And, and I recall I was up at the West Virginia Plott sectional this summer with Jamie Estep up there and all. They honored John Sturgill with their hunt. So I went up for that. And I was very close to an area that my dad and I had hunted years before when we had the old bear pen Sam dog, which I kind of call the foundation sire, really, of the dogs that we had going forward. He was born in 1960 and came from Isaiah Kidd. But we lost Sam and a dog we had called Hoss on a bear. A deer hunter had the dogs had run the bear right over top the deer hunter, and he had shot at it and hit it apparently. And he said those two, that brindle dog and that black dog, are hanging right on his butt. And we lost the dogs. We had no tracking collars, no means.
No.
Didn't know that country. It was big country in there, what they call glady. Some of our West Virginia listeners will know, and is in Randolph County. But anyway, sometime later, might have been 2 weeks, 3 weeks, or whatever, Dad gets a postcard from somebody, said, "Mr. Fielder, I have your dog." I think we had found the Hoss dog in the meantime, but that was old Sam, and Dad working, away, got home on the weekend and went and got old Sam, So.
It was the same way in Canada, when they would go to Canada in the 70s and even in the 80s. Some of those big blocks they would hunt in up there, if you lost a dog, there was no way to know where in the world it was at whatsoever. And if it didn't come out on one of those roads by the time you got ready to come back to Tennessee, it might be a couple of months and you'd get a long distance phone call from Canada and somebody'd have the dog.
Yeah.
And somebody'd have to go back to Canada and get it.
That's absolutely true. That happened to my dad the first trip he took up to upper Michigan, up on the Keweenaw Peninsula, way up there in northwestern on Lake Superior. Had to leave a dog out. Got him sometime later through the network of friends and so forth, But, well, there's certainly so many bear hunting memories that you and I both, we could spend all day here talking about them and those great dogs that we were privileged to hunt with, and probably some that weren't so great. But I wanted to talk to you, Tracey, today, especially having put my hand in, so to speak, at writing over the years and all, and enjoying it. It came to me as a job, really, when I went to UKC, and they said, you need to start writing for our publication. And I'd had a couple articles published in Full Cry magazine before then while I was overseas, but I hadn't done any writing, to any degree prior to that. But when I went to UKC, then I found I had to write, and we were building the magazine and wrote a lot of articles on history and so forth. But I was really excited, and I remained that way after having read your book, The Old Men. And I've got to get up with you and get a signed copy because I was kind of, well, it wasn't because I was cheap. I just wanted to get it and read it. So I bought, the copy for my Kindle. That's where I
Okay.
read most of my books and all, on Kindle. But tell me about the old men and what inspired you to write the book and what it's about.
Well, over the years in use of social media, we talk sometimes about the negative aspects of it, and there's certainly plenty of those. But I would write maybe a devotion about a certain issue or whatever on social media, and friends and family and other people would read it, and then that sort of grew over time where people would just read what I would write on Facebook. And I started having people that were close to me, especially family and pastor friends, really, who would say, "Why don't you take some of the things that you write on Facebook and write a book?" And I put it off for quite a few years because to me, there's just so many books out there. Why in the world does there need to be another one about anything? And I didn't want to do it, and then nobody had any interest either. And back last December, I think it was, a pastor friend of mine down in Maryville, Tennessee, named Tom Hatley, got a hold of me and he said, "I really want you to write something and put it in a book." And I said, "Well, Tom, I will, but what? What should I write about?" And he said, "Well," he said, him and his assistant had been talking about it, and they wanted to ask me if or suggest I write something about manhood and what it means to be a man. And I feel like a lot of topics are sort of, if you don't handle the topic rightly, it's just blatant arrogance. I mean, I'm certainly not going to write a book called Manhood and How I Became One. So if I was going to write on that, and the concern was there's so many boys growing up without moms, I mean dads, and there's our church boys today. If you're in a lot of churches, a lot of the boys are, the biblical word would be effeminate. They're male, but they're not masculine. And they were asking me to write something that would help with that particular topic, especially when boys and girls now don't even know which one they are.
Mm.
And I thought about it, and I thought, well, how do you do that and give like an example of what a man is, and it not be about you, because I certainly don't want to be anybody's example. And I thought, well, the old men I grew up around with, if the world was more like them, it would still be a better place. And so I just took a yellow notebook out, a legal pad. I use those things all the time. And I just began to write down quotes of things that old men had told me during my lifetime that actually still come to my mind. I didn't want to just write to write. I wrote down statements that I think of often that have sort of been a guide to me personally from these men. And when I got done, I had like 140 different things that I think of often in reference to my own life that have been a help to me. And I thought, well, if a young man was to sit down and be able to listen to the old men I grew up around, teach them some things, I think it would be a help to them. So I just began to sort of go through a topic at a time and put it in a short format. I wrote all of them in hopes that even people who don't like to read would be able to read it. And then tried to use, illustrations about my relationships with the old men and the things that I've been told. And that's just sort of how it came about. And I didn't know how long it would take, but I started I think I started like the 1st of February and was done in like less than 6 weeks.
Yeah, it seemed to me like that once I heard that you were, I guess through following you on social media, that you were going to write a book. Here it was. You know, you turned that thing over pretty quick.
Well, I've been preaching over 30 years, and almost everything in the book is something I've used as an illustration at some point.
Mm-hmm.
So I wasn't having to try to come up with material.
Well, that's kind of
Yeah.
my experience when I wrote the book. I'll give a shameless plug here. Gone to the Dogs: A Coon Hunter's Journey, and I will say I should have written it at least 20 years before I did. Back when people still actually read books. But anyway, you know, I had a lot of material to fall back on through all the articles that I'd written for, you know, the various coonhound magazines mainly. And so I get that. But what I really enjoyed about the book more, of course, I enjoyed the content. And, you know, back in my days, I was in a 10-year sales career before I went to the dogs, so to speak. And, you know, I read all kinds of motivational self-help books and all of that sort of thing. But I was a big fan of Reader's Digest because it was short. You could read it, you know, and I loved the little section they had called Toward More Picturesque Speech. And I've never considered myself to be much of a descriptive writer or even a creative writer for that. I mainly just record things of my experience and you know and things I've learned over the years. But what I enjoyed about your book, Tracey, is that it is you get it in, I guess the right term would be encapsulated form. You get small bites. The stories will speak to anybody that loves to look back at their roots or to be in the presence of an older person telling their story. And that's one of the things that I've learned about this podcast. I had the old gentleman, Glenn Young, on here a couple of podcasts back from Arkansas. Is 89 years old. And right away he said, Steve, I don't think these younger fellows would be interested in anything that I have to say, you know.
Right.
And that's absolutely not true. And I'm going to tear up when you hear Tracey. Those things speak volumes to our hearts, to our souls, the words of these older people. And you've captured that so beautifully in this book. As you tell, and I don't want to, you can synopsize the book or tell me so much tell my listeners so much better than I can. But as you read these stories of people of your experience or in your family or people that you've met, and the life lessons that are in those stories, you know, are very valuable. They're guidance. They're inspirational. They're, you know, helpful for that old boy that's going through a tough time, maybe. You know, it's all there, and it's a treasure. Really, I commend you highly for what you've done because it was not at all what I expected. I said, well, Tracey's going to write a book. So he's going to write a book about his family. He's going to write about the dogs. And although I want to read it, I really do. I know a lot of Tracey's story already. So, you know, okay. It was, you know, it was a breath of fresh air. I really did enjoy the book.
Man, I really appreciate that a lot, a whole lot.
Well, you know, anyone who's set their hand to pen and paper, or in the case nowadays to a keyboard, you know, it's not an easy task. And it doesn't get easier with time. You know, I'm writing right now. I only have one commitment right now, and that's to do these legendary bear dog articles for Bear Hunting Magazine. And the older I get, the more I attempt to do that, the more difficult it comes. The difficulty doesn't come in setting the words down on paper. The difficulty comes in the research and finding the subject matter and getting up with the guy and doing the interviews and then take all that information and try to condense it into what Colby Moorhead there wants of a couple thousand words and make it something that somebody would want to read. That's the challenging part, but more so than the writing, it's all the residuals that are involved with writing. You must you said you had a lot of material, but you still had to research all that.
Well, all I don't really know how to explain it because it was all personal. It wasn't anything I had to research. I literally just sat down and would do 2 or 3 of them at a time. I had it, outlined on my notebook. Then I might write 3 today. Then tomorrow I might write 4. Another day I might write 1. And then I stopped at 84 because my grandfather died when he was 84.
Okay, I was going to ask you that. I couldn't recall. My dad made it to 88. Yeah.
I just, I wanted to use that as an illustration of how you have a very small window in life to learn from the people that you need to learn from. And you need to take full advantage of that. There's just, we spend so much of our life making mistakes that other people have already made.
Yeah.
And there's no reason to make the same mistakes other people have made if you will listen to somebody. And so when my grandpa died at 84, it really was it was almost like a spigot of wisdom was turned off in our family.
Mm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so I stopped at 84 just symbolically to say, when the old man died, all that died with him. Unless you learn from it, then it doesn't die.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, my dad was as I think back on my life with my dad, I really got to spend very little of my time with my dad over the years. But every minute that I spent with him was quality time. He never got angry with me. He never tried to demean me, criticize me. He'd tell me how to drive. Sometimes when I was a teenager, we're out there hunting, and that's how I learned to drive. As my dad, he'd say, "Okay, get over here under the wheel." We'd be on a forest road somewhere or something, But my dad was a pipe fitter, worked away from home all the time, so he was gone all during the week. And then, I went 2 years to a junior college in my town, and then went to Florida to college and came back. And there was a period there, that 10 years through there, that he and I got to spend a lot of time together. And we hunted. That's probably when we did the most of our bear hunting during that time, from like 73 to 83. In that 10-year period. But then, I moved away to Michigan, and I didn't get home as often as I should have. And one thing and another. And I was busy, and we get busy and all that. And thank God for people like John Harris of West Virginia and the different ones, and Nathan Eds And just the guys that came by and picked Dad up and took him to the woods and all of those things. And John Sturgill told me, he said, when you moved away, Steve, your dad kind of adopted all of us, It's tough to make, I caught the break in your voice. It's tough to talk about these influences in our lives, Tracey, but, but my dad, when I'd go home, I'd sit down in the couch. We had a den downstairs in the basement. He had a walkout basement in his house. And we'd eventually migrate down there. But if I was sitting in the living room, he'd come through the house and he'd walk over and sit right down beside me and grab me by the knee and say, "Let's talk." Mm. And, those times were that's what your book is those old men talking to us, and their stories talking to us. And, so many times, and I know you've got a thought. I want to say this one before I forget it. After he was gone, I don't know how many times, and it still happens fairly often, Dad would know that. Something will come up. I'd say, Dad would know the answer to that.
Yep.
So it's a wealth, a treasure, really.
I have had that happen so many times. I would think, well, when it really hit me, it was a Saturday, and Papa had died, and Dad had died, and my wife and girls were doing something. They were out of town. And Ben, I'm not sure where Ben was that weekend. And I was just here, and I thought, I'm going to go talk to so-and-so. And I just went out and got in the truck, and that dawned on me. All the old men that I talked to, every last one of them was gone.
Wow.
They were gone. There was no more of my old men left. And
yeah,
they're gone. And so some people who listen to this podcast are not as fortunate as you and I. And I know this is true with a lot of people. They'll say, well, I didn't have a good dad, or I didn't have a good uncle or anything. So probably my favorite story, if it's okay to like your own stories, probably my favorite story in the whole book is the one where I asked Dad if I could smoke.
Right.
And I was like 4 years old, and we were out by the old barn and hog house, and Dad stopped. And at the time, Dad wasn't even a Christian at that point. He was pretty rough. And he looked down at me and he said, "I'll tell you what." He said, "I'll give you a cigarette." He said, "But if you can't smoke the whole thing," he said, "don't ever ask me for another one." And I said, "Okay." He handed me the cigarette. I mean, who hands a 4-year-old a cigarette? And I got the cigarette. Dad lit it for me, and I smoked a few puffs off of it. I couldn't take it anymore, and I just handed it back to him. And he looked at me. He said, "Now listen." He said, "Don't ever ask me for another one." Well, maybe a couple months or so went by, and we had a single wide trailer on the farm where my house is at now. And like I said, Dad was pretty wild, and some of his friends were over, and I think they were shooting the mailbox with a 357 just for fun that day.
Sounds like a good activity, wholesome activity.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's pretty rough characters, growing up. And Dad said he was leaving to go over to the store. Well, I was left there with my cousin Johnny, who was an adult. Johnny was just a few years younger than Dad. And when Dad drove off, Johnny asked me, he said, "You want a cigarette?" I said, "No." I said, "Dad told me if he ever caught me with another one that he'd let me have it." I said, "I don't want one." And Johnny said, "It's all right." He said, I'll take up for you." So I took a cigarette from Johnny, and a few minutes, Dad pulled in the yard. He got out of the car, looked up there. I was standing there with the cigarette on the porch. He walked right up on the porch, got me by the arm, we went in the house, and he kept his word, which he always did. And
had a little
I mean,
discussion about it.
Yeah, it was a little discussion, all right. And so I tell that story for this reason. My dad smoked his whole life, but he was addicted to it.
Hmm.
And I'm not telling this story to criticize smoking, but Dad wanted to quit smoking at different times, and he couldn't do it. And Dad he was tougher than a pine knot, but it had him by the pants.
Mm-hmm.
And it got to the point when I got older, I thought this is going to be the one thing that Dad lied to me about. Because he had never lied to me.
Yeah.
And he finally kicked it. And the reason I tell the story is to say, when my dad would whip me or ground me or whatever for smoking, and I hated smoking, I've never cared for it, but I loved to chew tobacco.
Yeah.
And I'd get in a big trouble, man, if he'd catch me with it. And people say, well, your dad was a hypocrite. And I said, no. What you got to realize about people is that all of us have flaws and imperfections. And especially with addictive things, it wasn't that Dad was a hypocrite. It was that Dad didn't want me to have the same troubles he had.
Exactly.
He was caught by the seat of the pants by something that he couldn't get loose from, and he didn't want me caught by it.
Yeah.
That didn't make him a hypocrite. It didn't make his advice invalid. It just meant he was a human being that had his own problems that didn't want his son to have the same problems.
Yeah.
And I feel like a younger generation needs to realize we got our advice from imperfect people.
Right.
And they're going to have to get their advice from imperfect people. But the cumulative wisdom over time is how one generation learns from the past generation.
Yep. And I think that's what we're missing so much, Tracey. And I don't claim to be any kind of a psychologist or whatever or counselor, but the kids, parents nowadays are afraid of their children. They're afraid that they're going to do something that's going to upset the balance in their child, when actually they're the ones that can create that a sense of balance. And it's just like training one of these Plott puppies. If we never give him an opportunity, he's never going to reach his potential. And I hate that, and I see it. I see it at every turn, where children today are not getting that kind of guidance, although some of the methods that we grew up under were a little rough. My mother, you talk about smoking, my mother caught me smoking one time and couldn't find my dad's belt or a switch, and she used the cord off of the Electrolux sweeper, and doubled it up and wailed the tar out of me with that thing.
Wow.
But I'm not advocating that parents do that to their kids, but I'm also not against spanking. If they need that little bottom warmed up, they need it. But
the point of the old man book really isn't to delve into the methodology that the parents used. It was just the point that and I preach this at church all the time in reference to the philosophy of how churches operate now. We might be, the last 50 years, it's very possible we were the first generation in church history to tell the old people to sit down and shut up because they don't know how to have church.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You got people now, they have to have 2 separate services because the kids won't go to church with their grandparents.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. It's a different world. That's for sure. And having been a pastor, I know that you've encountered that on a large basis, really. You were talking earlier, and I can't resist going back to this just a minute, because you talked about the old men. the things that they had to say. And you wrote down, what was it, 100 and how many items did you have written there?
It was like 140.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, my mother was born in 1922. My dad in 1920. And mother lived to be 100 years and 11 days old. So
wow.
she just died 2 years ago. But she had a multitude of what we back in the hills of West Virginia just commonly called sayings.
Yeah.
She had lots and lots of sayings. And those pop up all the time in my conversations with my brother, and I share them with my wife. And she came from the same part of the country, but she said, I never heard that. And I said, well, that must have been a Cabin Creek thing down where my mother grew up. But she came from East Kentucky roots, and all. But wow,
Well, it would be great if you could put all those down.
Oh yeah. We were talking the other day. It was miserably hot down here in Florida. And this kind of goes along with what I think that your book does, because it takes us back to read the stories of the old folks and how things were when the family was all together in a car. Now, keep in mind, this was probably around 1930 to 35 or somewhere like that. So it was most likely a Model A Ford or something like similar. And they'd gone to visit some relative, probably the older daughter that had gotten married and moved away or whatever. They're all in this car, and of course there's no air conditioning, and it's brutally hot. And they're traveling along, and a nephew of hers, a son of her oldest sister, had somehow on this trip acquired a chicken and had it in a box. And they were all just dying for a drink. And there weren't any, there wasn't a McDonald's on every corner to pull over and get a sweet tea, And so they came through, there was a big mud puddle there in that old West Virginia road. And Jay Howard, this little boy, he said, would you stop at this mud hole and let me get my chicken a drink? Well, that would often, those old stories were just told over and over and over when I was a kid. And of course, Mother answered, we all about killed him and threw him out of the car because we were all dying for a drink ourselves. But just those old sayings like that and stories and things, just priceless. And I really need to do what you've done, at least if for nothing else, just to keep them within the family, to preserve them for the future. And that's one of the reasons I like to do these podcasts, Tracey, is this recording someday, you and me will be gone. We'll be up there with Barry, enjoying, eternity with the Lord. But somebody may enjoy, some family member, your Hannah or somebody, or grandchildren or whatever, may enjoy just hearing, their dad or their grandfather's voice and the stories and all. So that's one of the things that I think about with these, with doing these podcasts, because it gets it as a matter of record, that somebody can go back to.
Well, you hit the nail on the head when you mentioned the podcast with Mr. Glenn from Arkansas. I listened to that last week while I was doing some cleaning up in the barn, and absolutely loved it. I mean, it's one of my favorites that I've ever heard. And,
well, Glenn is, I've met Glenn personally, and he's a tall guy, and he wears that black eye patch over his eye. As he said on the podcast, he looked like a pirate. He said he had so many kids come up to him and say, "Are you a pirate?" But there's no filter, Now, I did not caution him about language, and I didn't have to edit any language. I don't know if he uses profanity or not. I haven't talked to him enough to know that. But he does not have a filter when it comes to thinking about, individuals that he's met. And I think he made a comment to me about that, about his assessment of some of the people, in the dog world that he'd met over the years.
And when he invited you out there to go hunting with him in some of the best timber you'd ever stepped a foot in, I don't know how you're going to not do that.
Well, that's it. It's definitely on my bucket list now. In fact, I told my friend Nubbin Moore, Nubbin's in his 80s now, and we make the annual trip out to the White River in Arkansas, which is south of where Mr. Young lives. And I told Nubbin, I said, we may be missing a real good opportunity here. Maybe we need to go up and go hunting with Glenn, So, but, you think about this now. I'm 77. But by the time it's time to go to Arkansas, I'll be 78. And Nubbin's in his low 80s, and here's Mr. Young, 89. I'm thinking in a boat there on the Black River and those big river bottoms. I'm thinking, what's wrong with this picture? I think we may need to take a young buck or two along with us. I tell Nubbin that all the time as we go to Arkansas. I say, if you bring anybody else into our group, make sure they're young and they got good legs and they can go to the dogs. Because last year, oh man, I got frustrated. But Nubbin and I were hunting together. The guys, we all split up in different groups. And we were together, and our dogs treed down over a bank there. We were on a four-wheeler on a side-by-side trail there. And so I said, Nubbin's got, he's had reconstructive hip surgery. And so I said, it's kind of a little steep bank. I said, I'll go the dogs, Nubbin. Give me the gun. And so I got down there, and I saw my dog's coon going in. He was down the creek up to the right. His was to the left. I got up there and I started looking up and turning around, and I had vertigo, and I get dizzy, and I couldn't get to where I wanted to shine the tree, and I finally had to lay down on a bank on the other side of there's kind of went uphill on the other side of that tree, and I laid down on my back, and I'm up there shining this tree. I said, this is not good. I think I maybe nearing the end here. So anyway, the old men need young men. So, yeah. Well, Tracey, I certainly...
That's hilarious.
Yeah, it is. Well, it wasn't so funny at the time. I'll be honest with you. I got a little aggravated. You can get frustrated because, they say that getting old's not for sissies. Well, I can vouch for that. How you say your granddad was 84 when he died?
Yes, sir. He was 84.
What year was he born? Do you recall?
28.
Okay, so my dad was 8 years older than him. Dad was born in 1920. But They were both Tennessee boys. Yours from the eastern part, mine from the middle part. So that's
Dad died early. He was just 70.
Oh, your dad, yes.
Yeah.
Your granddad, I meant to say, yeah.
Yep. And Dad, he got a disease called scleroderma, and it's called the disease that turns your organs to stone.
My goodness.
It killed his esophagus.
Oh, my.
And he couldn't keep food down and basically just progressively starved to death.
My. I think.
And it was a terrible death. It's one of the worst things I've ever seen take anybody out. It was really sad. And
oh my!
But I include a story about that in the book.
Yes.
he was so sick that and just withered away to nothing. He could barely get up, and he was probably just days from being put on hospice, and he was needing to go to the bathroom, and Mom told him, she said, Terry, just sit down and go to the bathroom. And he absolutely refused. I mean, he was, adamant. He said, no. He said, men don't sit down to pee. And he would not sit down.
It's Tracey. And that kind of, I guess we called it a constitution that people had back in that day. You know, that's carried over to every area of their lives. Those fundamental things like that about your bathroom habits carried on into life, how he had standards and he had things that he would do and things that he absolutely wouldn't do. And to me, that's, well, people might say, well, that's being too rigid. You got to be, compliant and all of this.
No,
but
people who say that don't understand that that's not something he sat and thought through.
Yeah,
that's just his makeup.
That was part of who he was. Yes, indeed. Yep. My dad, I've told people this so many times, he was fearless. He was a mild mannered guy, a gentleman in every aspect. He used to tell me when I first started dating, he said, Steve, you always be a gentleman. He used to tell me that all the time. But, he was absolutely fearless. He walked that high steel on those big plants with a block and tackle on his shoulder. If he'd fallen, he'd still be falling probably.
I think one of the hardest things to watch in life is to watch what I call the old bulls begin to go downhill. Mm-hmm. And I remember there was two things that happened with Dad that just wrenched me. One was we needed to put some hay up, and my family over the years would never do major projects on Sunday. I mean, they'd feed stock, or if an animal was sick, they'd take care of it or something, but they didn't do farm work to amount to anything on Sundays.
Right.
They're just how they function. And of course, you remember when stores wasn't even open on Sundays.
Exactly.
So one day after church, Dad said, and one of the greatest honors of my life was being his pastor. I lived away from here for years, and then when I ended up pastoring here, when your own dad's willing to let you be his pastor, I don't know anything better. And
right.
He asked me one day, he said, son, I've got that hay down over there, and he said, it's going to rain tomorrow. He said, you think the Lord would be upset if we bailed that today? And man, he was so sick, he could hardly move. And I said, Daddy, I don't think that would bother the Lord. And we went over there on Sunday afternoon, and he got down on his knees to try to put the shaft off the baler onto the PTO of the tractor, and he couldn't lift it. Wow. Well, he was always stout as a stinking ox. Just had great big massive forearms, and I saw him struggling with it, and I felt terrible for him, and at the same time, didn't want to embarrass him. And I just walked over there, just didn't say a word. I just walked over, leaned down, got a hold of it, raised it up, put it on the shaft, and just didn't even look him in the face. Just turned my back to him, walked on over to the other tractor.
Yeah.
And the last time we went trout fishing together, I'd never outfished him. He was a phenomenal trout fisherman and very proficient. And I learned to trout fish following him up and down the creeks. And that particular day, I was up the creek from him, and I looked down and saw him. He went down off the bank to get closer to the creek, and he was, real sick and didn't have much longer to live. And I happened to notice he couldn't get back up the bank. Mm-hmm. Well, this is a guy that used to, follow bear tracks through the mountains with a dog still on the lead through the laurels.
Yeah.
And couldn't get up a bank. And I just watched him for a minute, and he got down on his hands and knees, didn't holler at me, didn't ask for help, just got down on his hands and knees and crawled back up into the road. And when you watch those old bulls that have been, that kind of men, of course, Papa was part of the greatest generation, and Dad was part of the Vietnam era. And when you see them go downhill, you're losing something important.
Oh, absolutely. And, the realization as we grow older that you can't do some of those things. And you're mentioning things you're tugging at, some things that trout fishing is one of my absolute favorite things to do. And my dad used to tell me, he said, Stevie, these old rocks are getting too slippery for me anymore. I can't wade the creek like I used to, Well, hey, I'm there. I'm there. So we do what we can do, we do what we can. Well, listen, what's let's get back over on to a great discussion about life and our families and all. And really, I know that's much enjoyed. Let's talk about the dogs just a little bit. Now, you guys, how many dogs are in the Houston Valley pack right now? Do you think you guys are feeding?
Well, I still bear hunt some, but not a whole lot.
Right.
Ben, he bear hunts basically full time.
Yeah.
And, I think he's probably got, I think he may have 6 grown dogs, finished dogs.
Mm-hmm.
And then he's probably got 6 or 8 dogs ready to start this year that he's just getting started.
I got you. Yeah.
Ben don't like to fool with a dog a whole lot after it's been finished. He likes to start a dog.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so,
well, let's talk. Let me jump
2 or
in.
3 puppies, maybe.
Oh, okay. Let's jump in here now. Ben became of age as a bear hunter at a very young age. He was just not much more than a kid when he was out there bear hunting, pretty much on his own, wasn't he?
Well, see, we lived in Montana, and I'd gone to college. Then I'd worked in a church in eastern part of Virginia. When I left there, I went to Montana and started a church from scratch in southwest Montana. Okay. And while we were there, I wanted to get my hounds back because I'd been without them,
Mm-hmm.
So I called my papa and I said, listen, I want to start mountain lion hunting out here, and I want you to send me a dog. And he said, well, I've got this young dog and this young dog, and which one do you want? And I called my cousin Charles and I said, listen, here's what I'm going to do, and here's what Papa said he's got. I said, which one do you think would be best for me to bring out here? So he told me Papa had a young male dog, about a year old, that he called Cody, that had one bear season behind him. And he shipped me that dog out with a shipper. And so Ben actually got his start lion hunting.
Okay.
I had a friend that I went to church with named Rick Price, one of my best buddies, and Rick had an old blue tick he called Kramer, which is still one of my favorite dogs I've ever hunted with, and just a really good trail dog. I tell people Kramer was the kind of dog you could turn loose on a lion track in the morning and just go to town and eat lunch and then come back somewhere and find him treed. He was going to peck away till he got it.
Yeah.
And when I got Cody out there, he had only been bear hunted, and I was going to start coon hunting him some on the river because you could coon hunt year round in Montana.
Mm-hmm.
He didn't know what a coon was. I remember I introduced him to a coon occasionally. He wouldn't even bark at it.
Yeah. I
had to take it to Rick's and let the blue tick bark at it for Cody to realize I wanted him after it.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it wasn't just, like the first night that he took, once he realized I wanted him to actually run it, he took right to coon hunting. In fact, within probably just a couple of months after I got him, I went over to, by accident, totally by accident, I'd told Ben about these night hunts when I was young, and he wanted to go to one, and we drove over to Laurel, Montana to a night hunt, and it turned out to be a world qualifier.
Okay.
And I drew out with a Walker dog that had won the region the year before and won the cash that night, qualified for the world hunt.
All right.
With a dog I just got. And the dog we beat that night, the Walker dog, was a good dog, but I had hunted Cody enough. He never sold you out. However, when you knew his barks, he never threw you under the bus, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, I'm with you.
If he opened, he was not coming back. So you were not going to get scratched on track.
Yeah.
And if he treed, it was going to be there. So, and I'd learned that already about him. And so it worked out. And we started line hunting with Rick. And the trouble I had with him was he'd been used to bear hunting, and some people understand this and some won't, but he was used to being on a track and being able to keep his head up in the air and run.
Yeah.
And he wasn't accustomed to having to drop his head down and go track to track.
Right.
So he was in a learning curve when I first got him. And that's how Ben got his start, was with that, with Cody. And then about, I'm going to say within 2 years of getting started line hunting, we moved back to Tennessee, and in October he killed his first bear. In December he would have been 12. There was a space of time there within 2 months where he killed his first elk, his first mule deer buck, and his first black bear
at 12 years old.
At 12.
Yeah, that's pretty early to start.
And then we homeschooled, and so what we would do, Martha would let Ben start school early in the summer and get time in, and then she would give him every year all fall off to hunt with Papa. I still had a job to do.
Yeah.
But Papa was getting older, and he needed a hand. So basically, Ben got to hunt the entire bear season every year since he was 12 years old.
Yeah, that's great. Get to hunt with your grandfather, man. What or your great grandfather, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah, and it was, Ben was. I feel like Ben got to get in a learning curve there with me at the same time, trying to figure the line hunt thing out, because it's a little bit different style dog.
Yeah.
And it was actually partly due to plottdogs.com. I got on this kick that I wanted to find the coldest nose Plotts that I could possibly find.
Mm-hmm.
And man, I called everybody in the country. It's how I met Mike Cawley.
Yeah.
If you had a phone number and somebody told me you had the coldest nose Plotts, you got a phone call from me. Well, I finally ended up talking to a guy in Southwest Colorado. I can't think of his name, but I was told he was one of these guys that hunted horseback. He'd put on a track, and if he didn't tree it that day, he'd pick it up the next day and go after it. And then
was his name Terry something?
No, I remember he told me he was a school teacher.
Okay. I know that Joe and Nancy Hudson had a friend out in Colorado that they used to go out there and hunt with. But you would know his name if I could think of it. Yeah.
But what was so funny was I asked this guy, I said, okay, now realize I'm zoned in, focused on trying to find some hidden miracle Plott.
Okay.
And so I asked this guy, I said, what stock of Plott do you hunt? He said, I really don't think it's about the stock of Plott I hunt. I said, I just think it's the amount of experience they get. And his personal theory was most dogs had similar noses. It was just depending on whether they learned to use them or not.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, I give my dog so much experience, they learn to track. So I was not satisfied with that. I just knew I could find these miracle nose Plotts.
Yeah.
And so I said, no, tell me where you get your dogs from. He said, well, I get them from a hog hunter down in, I think he said, was it Alabama? What's the guy's name, Steve?
Orville Roberts.
Yes, that's it. He said, I get my dogs from Orville Roberts. And I said,
Alabama.
you get your lion dogs from a hog hunter. He said, yeah. He said, think about it. He said, anything that has a hoof that you trail in sand, a dog that trails that hoof in sand has a good nose. And I said, okay. But what was so ironic about it, this was on a Saturday. I was talking to this guy. Orville Roberts was sitting over here a mile from Papaw's farm at a restaurant having lunch with Papaw because they was up here getting a pup from Papaw.
Wow.
And it was
crazy.
it was crazy. It was literally crazy. And the Arville had a younger hunting buddy that was buying the pup, but Arville would come with him. And the point is, everybody's looking for these phenoms and all that kind of stuff. And really, to me, just most game is going to be caught with just a good, solid working animal.
Yeah.
If you happen to get a phenom, good for you. But when a man tells me he's had 36 once in a lifetime dogs,
yeah, exactly.
Sure.
I got to tell you a quick little story about old boy back in West Virginia. There was a coon hunter there that worked on a railroad named Leo Lars, and I've mentioned him before, and I hunted with Leo a lot. He liked a good dog. He usually only kept one or two coon dogs, but he wanted a jam up good one, So he saw an ad in our local paper, coon dog for sale. And he mentioned this guy's name, and he said Gray Flats. Now, Gray Flats was just an old worked out strip job along the Piney River there on the, would be in the east side of our town. And I used to squirrel hunt all that, walk over there from school. But anyway, he said he rolled up there in front of George's house, and it was just a little tar paper shack. In other words, I don't know if you know what that is, Tracey, but a little wooden rough built with roofing paper for siding, And walked up, knocked on the door, and he said, "Are you Mr. Akers?" And he said, "Yes, sir." He said, "I hear you've got a coon dog for sale." And he said, "Hey, money, I got 26 coon dogs." Old Leo said he thanked him. He said, "I talked to him for a little bit and thanked him and got my truck and went back home." Because there wasn't 26 coon dogs in Raleigh County, West Virginia at that time.
Right.
Probably in the whole southern part of West Virginia. Oh, boy, it's great stuff, Tracey. Man, we could talk for a long time. We've been at it for about an hour and a half now. And I know it's Wednesday. You probably got church tonight, don't you?
I do.
Yes.
I normally wouldn't even be doing any kind of farm work on a Wednesday, but I'm up against the gun with the weather.
Oh, I see. Well, I know we're planning, as this is being recorded, the UKC Zone Championships for the World Hunt, where you have to go and get through the zone. Our little Plott dog fever's hunting in Rogersville. So, and that's not very far from you, is it?
No, it's not. It's like 30 miles.
I see. Well, I've been watching that weather, and I think there's about a 50% chance of rain, it looks like, on Friday. I don't know, but did you get all that hay in?
No, I've got it down. I got to try to get it up.
Get it up, I say.
Yep.
Yeah. Well,
so Fever is hunting in Rogersville on Friday night?
He's hunting on Friday and hopefully Saturday. They have to hunt 2 nights.
Are you going to be up here for that?
No, I'm not. My partner, Mark Miller, will be there. He's from Taylorsville, North Carolina. It's about a 3-hour drive for him. And if we get through the Rogersville zone and we get into the finals, which will be in Marshall, Illinois, I plan to go out there. But that'll be the following weekend. But Yeah. So anyway, I've been watching the weather from up there in your part of the world. Of course, by the time people listen to this, that Rogersville hunt will be history. And but Tracey, it's been great to talk to you. I hope we can do it again. I know that you do some writing for Colby with Bear Hunting Magazine from time to time. Are you doing anything else? Got any new writing projects or books or anything in the future?
Well, I write that column for Colby, and that's just various stuff. Sometimes it's on some bear hunter that I know. Sometimes it's on, if I'm going to deal with hounds, I like to deal with fair chase.
Yeah. Gotcha.
I'm very, very passionate of trying to explain our side of the story.
I got you. And of course, this Colorado battle, as we're talking here, is raging out there to try to save hunting in Colorado. I've been in many of those battles over the years when I was with UKC. And we've got to, as Clay Newcomb says, we've got to guard the gate. We've got to keep this thing going for future generations. And I applaud your work that you're doing with that. You mentioned Chris Powell earlier. Chris had called me as I was coming out of the airport with my rental car heading over to Autumn Oaks and asked me if I would write a column for this new houndsman group, that National Houndsman Group, and I don't even know the name of it. Maybe you do.
The National Houndsman Alliance. And I really hope that thing gets feet under it and becomes something substantial, because we're going to need it.
Well, absolutely. And we've needed it for several years, Tracey. And it's always been that thing of getting the egos, to step back and look at the big picture and what are we trying to, achieve. I know years ago there was a National Coonhound Association. There was a founding meeting at Autumn Oaks between Fred Miller with UKC and George Slankard, who was a publisher of American Cooner, and they couldn't agree on who was going to run it. Well, it's not important about who's running it, as long as you need good leadership, no question, you do.
Well,
but
Danny Doobie is getting ready to put out you asked me about writing. Danny Doobie is getting ready to put out a full cry dedicated to the issue in Colorado.
Good.
And he specifically asked me if I would write an article basically asking people to unite.
Yes.
And so I titled the article, "The Enemy of My Enemy is My Friend."
Yes.
And basically just said, I understand that houndsmen have a hard time getting along with each other. I mean, to be a legit houndsman, you have to be sort of, you have to have some hardcore nature about you of some sort. And especially,
it's not for the faint-hearted.
Yeah,
sure.
It's not. It draws a certain kind of person, and that kind of person is not always, conducive to social matters.
All right.
But this is a time in our history where, like you said, you've got to put aside jealousies and preferences and old battles and that kind of stuff, because the only way that I personally can see that this thing is going to be safe for future generations is for the houndsmen to get along with each other.
Yeah.
It don't mean you have to be everybody's best friend. It just means you have to join together and help each other for the right things.
Right. Right. Exactly. And I think that's and without getting into the politics and all, we're facing an election here. The personalities don't matter.
Mm-hmm.
It's what the candidate is able to accomplish for our country. Can the person do the job? Can the person be the leader we need? Those are the issues. Yeah. The personality doesn't matter. I've often said, my my little yardstick is about whether or not I really like a person is, would I want to get in a truck and drive a 500-mile trip with them to a bear hunt or a coon hunt? And that's pretty good. If I say no, then, but it doesn't matter in this case whether we like the person or not.
No.
It's strictly our livelihood. And you know this, Tracey, I'm preaching to the choir. Depends, as you said, on us getting into the harness together and pull in the same direction and save this thing for future generations. If we don't, it's lost. There's no question. There's no either or. There's no compromise there. We've got to win or we're done.
And it don't matter who leads it as long as they're competent.
Exactly.
That's the only criteria. It don't matter if you like them. It don't matter if you hunt with them. The only thing that matters is, are they competent?
That's right. Are they able to accomplish the goals that we all know? We all know what those goals are. We're going to differ a little bit about the little idiosyncrasies of the regulations and this and that and whatnot. But at the bottom, at the end of the day, it's, can we hunt with the dog or can't we? Can we take our hounds out there and enjoy a day of bear hunting with our relatives and friends and our kids?
Well, I know this has been tried before, and I know that it has failed on a few occasions, but we're at the point now where failure is not an option.
Exactly.
This thing's got to work. It's got to be started. What's already started, it's got to be started. It's got to be funded. It's got to be joined and supported, because, frankly, there is no other option. It has to work this time.
That's right. That's exactly right. And that's why, I told Chris, I said, don't tell my wife that I agreed to do this, and I'm going to be in trouble if she's in the next room listening. No, it's not quite that bad, but yes, you're exactly right, Tracey. We don't have a choice, and we'll talk more about that. And I'm glad to hear that Danny and Jason are going to do a focus on that in Full Cry. I love Full Cry magazine. I'm so happy that the Doobies have picked it up out of the ashes, so to speak, and are doing a great job with it. It's much enjoyed, and it's a bargain at any price as far as I'm concerned. But
as much information as you can get online and through digital media, there's still nothing like going to the mailbox and pulling out a Full Cry.
Oh, yeah. I've said it on here many times. In my day, as I was young, it came rolled up in brown paper. And you had to, if you took a razor blade or something, you had to be real careful. You should slit that down so you didn't cut your magazine cover, But it's been a lifeline for the tree hound sports for so many years, and it's just great to see it going forward. Okay, somebody's trying to get a hold of me here. Are you still with me?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, I heard. Hopefully that will translate through. Well, Tracey, once again, I want to thank you. Is there anything that we should have talked about that we've just totally dodged here that you would like to share with my listeners?
Steve, if I could say one thing to everybody that turns a dog loose, it would be this. It's okay to want to be great, but if you don't enjoy the trip ain't worth taking.
Well, that's right. This is all supposed to be fun and recreation.
Do you enjoy it? Are you having a good time?
Exactly. It's not a job. It shouldn't be a job. Maybe you're an outfitter and you'd say, well, yeah, it is. But for most of us, no, it's supposed to be, and it is, to me, the greatest sport. Who could think of a better sport than taking these beautiful animals that God's given us and seeing them perform up to their abilities and be in the great outdoors. And when I go ahead.
People want to ask me about Papa all the time. Wherever I go, they want to know about Papa, and I tell them, he wasn't the greatest bear hunter I ever met, but he enjoyed it more than anybody I ever met, and so that made him the winner.
Absolutely, and I can say the same thing for my dad. He absolutely loved it, and it wasn't about killing anything. And we'd go coon hunting. Sometimes he wouldn't even look up the tree. He's just there petting the dogs and listening to them. And he liked to carry his tape recorder bear hunting. And they hunted a lot at night during the training season, not hunting. They weren't harvesting bear. They were just treeing them. And Dad was always a soft-spoken person. And I've told on here about my brother and I. We'd get a little bit aggravated with him when we were out there in the truck. And he decided he wanted to say something, but he'd pick up his mic and key it, and then he'd think about what he's going to say. And we'd say, Dad, release the button there. You're blocking out everybody. But he'd think about it, But he just loved to go and be with the dogs. And, it was just in his DNA. Maybe it's a Tennessee thing, Tracey, you think? Well, thank you so much for spending the time with me, Tracey. I'd like to do another hour and a half with you. I really would. In fact, we've gotten about an hour and 45 in now. So,
I appreciate it. I would say this. If anybody's interested in the book, Steve, they can get it straight off of Amazon, The Old Men.
Okay. Absolutely, and do it, folks, because it's money well spent. It's cheap, but the content in it is excellent. I stake my, as they say, maybe I better not stake my reputation. That might not be such a good endorsement. But no, you will enjoy The Old Men as I have, and I think the author and the Tennessee bear hunter, Baptist minister, jack of all trades, farmer, hay producer. T.L. Jones. We call him Tracey, our close friends. Thank you so much for coming on, Tracey.
I appreciate it. Thank you for having me.
You got it, brother. Well, folks, if you're in the need for anything in the way of hunting supplies for you or your dog, apparel, electronics especially, and great customer service, remember our friends at W Hunting Supply and Alpha Dog Nutrition, all the complete line of products they have to make your hunts more successful with a healthy dog. This is Steve Fielder. If anyone asks you where I am, it'd be a pretty good guess to say he's gone to the dogs.